Leonard is an old, stocky, sloppy, but elegantly pompous cat. He is very intelligent and quite independent, with an obsessive fondness for food. Leonard spends his days marching through his kingdom with his back erect, stomach out, almost touching the floor, baton in his six-toed paw, conducting his imaginary band as he parades through his domain. Though king and fearless leader to his subjects, no one is allowed to talk to or to even view his beneficent presence. He's too important for that. His comment on the matter is that I should be heard, not seen. My existence is far too important and influential for anyone to even consider viewing my person. The fact of the matter is that there aren't any subjects at all, except for his cat box and the bowl, always filled to the brim with his favorite brand of canned food. Leonard lives his life in total solitude. His vassals are a figment of his imagination. He likes it that way. It's safe, and no one can tell him what to do. Minky is a beautiful young feline with blue eyes. She's quite independent with an open approach to life. Unlike Leonard, she has no hesitation about letting anyone invade her world. This creates much drama in her life, and if it weren't for the fact that she's so charming and beautiful, her troubles would have escalated and whisked her out of existence a long time ago. Minky amuses herself by parading in front of adoring crowds, where she finds delight in snubbing romantic advances. Being originally from Savannah, Georgia, she would say in a faint southern drawl, Why, I just don't understand what this fuss is all about every time I walk into a room. Can't a respectable southern feline like myself be left to her own private inclinations? And then would immediately turn around to see who was paying attention as she quickly left. Minky thought that after long deliberation, a change of habitat would be healthy. The idea of being alone in her one-room apartment down on Avenue C and 4th Street would be too much to endure during the approaching winter. There was never sufficient heat, and the group of boys that congregated in front of the stoop of her building frightened her. Besides, she felt the need to have someone who would constantly fawn on her. A friend had told her of this very peculiar fellow named Leonard. The friend explained that Leonard was a bit eccentric and lived across town in a large apartment on the Upper West Side near Central Park, where the neighborhood was very affluent and stylish. Minky never for a moment thought there would be any objections if she moved into his apartment. After all, she was charming, beautiful. No one could possibly reject her. So with one dress, one nightie, and 2 pounds of makeup, Minky took the subway uptown to her unsuspecting host. Approaching Leonard's building, Minky noticed an old one-eyed cat sitting on the stoop of the brownstone, wearing a sleeveless t-shirt with a tattoo of a feline on his left paw. He introduced himself as Sam. He appeared to be a little drunk, and as Minky passed by, Sam made a rude comment while inviting her into his basement apartment. Frightened, Minky ran up the stairs as fast as she could. Reaching Leonard's door, which was slightly ajar, Minky detected a foul odor that reminded her of old socks. She could hear music coming from the apartment. Entering, she could not believe her eyes. There in the corner of the large, dingy apartment stood a giant cat, or at least the semblance of one, clutching a baton in his paw and flailing his arms up and down furiously to the sound of a marching band playing on an old, beat-up record player. Leonard's eyes were shut tight, and the expression he wore reminded her of a possessed dog she had once seen in a horror film. Totally oblivious to his surroundings, he swayed back and forth to the music. Slightly disgusted, Minky decided to ignore the spectacle and take a further look around her new abode. The apartment was a pigsty. Week-old cups of cold coffee lined the table and the windowsills of the once elegant brownstone. The refrigerator housed moldy containers of 9 Lives takeout that had been there for months. The bathroom. The bathroom. Was that a cat box or the city sewer backed up? Overcome by the smell, Minky dropped to the floor, and as Leonard's silhouette danced across the dingy paint-peeled walls, she fainted. When her eyes slowly opened, all Minky saw was a large face staring down at her. Leonard's eyes mirrored the mind of a madman, and drool was dripping from his large jowls. His breath reeked of turkey and giblets. In one swift move, she darted to the other side of the room. Leonard, shocked by the intruder, ran as fast as he could and hid under his bed. He stayed there for over a week, shaking in fear. After 2 weeks had passed, Leonard's fear abated, and Minky's repulsion for Leonard began to subside. Minky couldn't understand, however, why Leonard showed little interest in her. After all, she was very beautiful, and everybody else always paid a lot of attention to her. Leonard wondered why Minky was continually giving him strange looks. He was a very busy cat, and his kingdom and orchestra were his priorities. He felt he was being generous in allowing her to stay. Leonard spent his days conducting the imaginary band, and Minky spent her days cleaning up the mess Leonard made. Leonard, however, was irritated with Minky's determination to rearrange the furniture and bric-a-brac in the apartment. He was very comfortable with the way things were. He would tell Minky he liked it messy. Minky argued it was unhealthy, and the clutter made her nervous and constantly distraught. Leonard felt that his conducting was much more important than the arguments with Minky. He eventually gave in to her demands and did not discuss the issue any further. After some time had passed, Leonard began to enjoy watching little Minky prance around the apartment in her cleaning garb. Minky, although finding Leonard quite eccentric, also found him very endearing. Their life together wasn't so bad after all. One night in the dead of winter, a blizzard caught the city by surprise. All the electricity, including the heat, failed. Shivering half to death, Minky crawled over to Leonard's lair and reluctantly snuggled beside him in an attempt to get warm. As the light from the candle flickered in a waltz-like rhythm, the reflection gleamed in Leonard's half-open eye, watching little Minky suspiciously. Suddenly a loud crash sounded as part of the ceiling caved in from the weight of the snow. When the broken pieces of plaster came crashing down, a large piece fell on Minky's head and knocked her unconscious. The snow and frigid wind raged through the apartment as Leonard dragged little Minky's body under the bed for shelter. Her breathing was faint. Blood trickled from her nose. Leonard was very distressed. He never had to take responsibility for anyone else before, not even himself. When Minky finally regained consciousness, she was shaking uncontrollably from a fever. Leonard grabbed some blankets from the closet. He covered her small, frail frame. He then scurried to the bookcase, hoping to find a cure to save her. Up on the second shelf sat an old, tattered book. Its blue cover was faded, and he could barely read the title, Healing Through Ancient Herbs. Sitting down by the record player, Leonard impatiently flipped through the pages until he came upon the chapter, Colds, Influenza, and Fever. He quickly scribbled down in his notebook the names of the herbs and their corresponding proportions needed. The thought of having to run out and obtain the necessary ingredients frightened him. Leonard feared the outside world. It was a rare occasion when Leonard left his home. He disliked people and felt uncomfortable in open spaces. But there was no choice. Leonard grabbed his satchel and ran out to the herb garden in the park to collect the herbs. He returned an hour later and lit the stove. He boiled some water and began preparing the concoction. Although Leonard had boarded up the holes in the ceiling and the broken window, the cold wind blew fiercely through the cracks in the windows. It produced a strange, eerie sound, intensifying Leonard's fear and sense of impending disaster. When the elixir was ready, Leonard took a teaspoon of the vile liquid and tried coercing Minky to swallow it. She shut her eyes tight, moving her head from side to side, avoiding any contact with the awful-smelling medication. Leonard began reciting humorous limericks, hopping up and down on one foot as his big belly shook from side to side, hoping to make Minky laugh. Finally, unable to control herself, Minky let out a howl. At that instant, Leonard poured the liquid through her open mouth and down her throat. Leonard continued to nurse Minky. As the blizzard raged on, he braved the elements and would go to the park to get the needed herbs. Minky was slowly regaining her health. One evening, very tired from his chores, Leonard lay down next to Minky for a rest. Minky lay there thinking what an extraordinary fellow this Leonard was. No one had ever taken care of her before with such devotion. Leonard lay there thinking how life is so unpredictable. Just a few weeks ago, nothing in his life mattered other than his orchestra. They stared at each other through the night, and by daybreak, their stares turned into loving gazes. The morning sun melted the icy darkness that had surrounded them. Leonard and Minky were in love. For the first time in Leonard's life, he gained the courage to leave his dreary enclave. Agoraphobia is not a pleasant affliction. The fear of going out was overwhelming. His heart pounded furiously. He broke out in cold sweats and got so dizzy he would lose all sense of balance. Minky's companionship made it easier for Leonard to overcome the fear he had had for so long. They would take walks in the park. They'd go to shows and even go dancing on some occasions. Crowds didn't frighten him much anymore. And when he did start to get panicky, Minky was there to assure him all was safe. Minky's interest blossomed. Leonard's collection of books kept her enthralled. And each night after their evening stroll, Leonard and Minky would lie on the rug in front of the fireplace and they would read to each other. Minky acquired a passion for esoteric literature. She loved to read about ancient rituals performed by different cultures and study manuscripts written on the healing properties of crystals. Leonard, who was well versed on the subject, would occasionally perform the rituals for Minky's pleasure. Minky felt a new sense of awareness and excitement while her respect and love for Leonard grew. The years passed quickly. As Minky's enthusiasm flourished, Leonard's vitality waned. He was finding it harder and harder to keep up with Minky. The long walks were becoming too strenuous, and he was experiencing lapses of memory. Minky's attempts at gaining Leonard's attention grew futile. He would fall into old memories from childhood, losing all sense of reality. His vision became weak, and his appetite, although healthier than most, decreased enormously. Leonard was dying. Minky prayed to God for an answer. She thought how cruel and unfair this God of hers must be. And after all the things she and Leonard had been through, why was her love being taken away? Minky, desperate and deluded, told herself that Leonard was not dying, but possessed by a demon. Deciding to perform a cleansing ritual, she prepared the incense, the candles, and other needed paraphernalia. Minky led Leonard onto the large marble table opposite the fireplace. She gently helped Leonard lie down. The skies grew dark. Thunder and lightning appeared. And as Minky's eyes rolled back in her head, she began to chant. Leonard lay there motionless. But as Minky's wails climaxed, he began writhing in pain, groaning and screaming. Suddenly, the thunder and the lightning ceased, and a thick blanket of silence smothered the air. Despite Minky's efforts to save him, Leonard was dead. The mourning period for Minky was a difficult one. She became lethargic and didn't leave the apartment. The only time she went out was to buy groceries and mail the rent check. Minky refused visitors and had the phone shut off. The window shades were kept down and fabric was placed over the mirrors. Dressed in black, she would sit for hours staring at the dusty record player. Sam, the crusty, one-eyed tomcat who lived downstairs in the basement, has a passion for alcohol and felines. The last time he held down a job was 5 years ago when he worked as a security guard for a well-known catnip company. During one of the late-night shifts, he had been drinking and decided to abscond with a carton of the valuable herb. His only income now is a welfare check, and he receives that once a week. One night, in a drunken state, while preparing dinner, Sam fell asleep. When the liquid evaporated, the heat from the pot ignited an old calendar that hung precipitously over the stove. Billows of smoke and flames rose quickly through the old dry building. Minky awoke to the sound of sirens. Minky climbed up to the roof. As the smoke overcame her, she saw the tall hook ladder ascending. Days went by as Minky wandered the streets aimlessly. Homeless and destitute, she dragged herself into Central Park. Minky collapsed on a smooth rock. She began to think about her life with Leonard, how they met, and how he had changed her. She remembered the good times, the bad times, and that occasion when she was so demanding about keeping the apartment tidy. If only I could see him now, just one more time, I would apologize, she whimpered to herself. Suddenly, through the morning mist, Minky saw a figure walking towards her. At first, she thought it was a panhandler coming over to ask for a handout. But as the figure drew near, Minky realized it was transparent. It was carrying a baton. And as she rubbed her eyes in disbelief, she heard the sound of an orchestra warming up. There stood Leonard in full marching band regalia. "Minky," Leonard spoke in a soft, compassionate tone, "even though I'm gone, my spirit will live through you always. Love transcends time and space. It is stronger than the hardest stone. It is deeper than the sea. And the love we shared will burn longer than the brightest star. We will always be a part of each other." Leonard lifted his baton. "By the way, thank you for teaching me how to keep the apartment so clean and tidy." Hesitating for a moment, he winked at her. "I'm not afraid of crowds anymore either. How am I doing?" The tip of his baton fell. The music started, and through the morning mist, Minky knew all would be well from that moment on.